Let this be a lesson to all of you.
No vlog is worth the sacrifice. I've had this guy for frickin' 7 years, and now he's broken.
So anyways, my original concept of what I wanted to talk to you guys about this week was, of course, my hero storyline. So what is the hero storyline, you might ask? Well, the hero storyline was something that I started when I was a freshman in college. Back then is when my insomnia really started to take effect and I was really having a lot of trouble sleeping. So I tried to think of a way that could help me get to sleep, and the best idea that I could come up with that was the equivalent of like watching a TV show or watching a movie, which never helped me, was basically trying to exhaust my brain by just thinking about something. So I came to the idea of writing a story myself. But of course, what was I going to write about? So that night that I had this first issue, I had two situations that came up. One, I went over to a friend's house to kind of help them with some relationship issues that they were having, and they just really needed someone to talk to. And then also that night was a new episode of the TV show Heroes. So I kind of took those two ideas and smashed them together to kind of create this new concept. The concept that I came across was basically just writing a story about the life I experienced, but what if that life, the people in it, had special abilities, special powers, that kind of stuff. And what was funny is what started as just a situation to help me sleep at night eventually grew into something so much bigger. After the first couple nights where it helped me get to sleep, I eventually started writing more of it when I was on the bus, or when I was walking around campus, or when I was in a class and I was extremely bored. And I just kept going, just writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. Fuck! Careful when you have a broken iPad, you're gonna freaking get glass in your finger. So anyways, that was the whole beginning of the concept. And I kept on writing until I got to the end of a point where I was like, this is kind of the end of a story, so I'm gonna cut it right here. Didn't stop me from writing more of it though. So the next part that I started writing, I ended up deciding that I was like, I'm gonna divide these things into parts. Each part's gonna have its own kind of sub-story going on, but overall there's gonna be just a long story going on that crosses all the different parts. So I kept writing and kept introducing new characters, all of them people that I knew, which was the main concept of this story. Was it was me and it was all my friends. Eventually these characters actually kind of grew into characters of their own. You know, they didn't no longer directly represented us, but that's where the influence kind of came into play. So influencing me with these different stories and different concepts was actually everything around me. A lot of the stories were actually influenced from direct interaction that was going on within my group of friends. When it came to relationships, conflicts, everything like that kind of influenced the story as a whole. Not only that, but I got a lot of influence of my story from shows that I was watching. Stuff from like Red vs. Blue to Ruby to Doctor Who to all these different things that I just really enjoy watching and getting influenced by when it comes to the story. Kind of put their factors into my story, and I kind of worked things around to make it work in there. As time went on, I wrote about 8 parts of the story. It kept building on, and just eventually I got to 8 parts, and I was like, okay, this is about time that we have to finish it. We have to get to an end of it and just kind of leave it at that. When I reached that end, the biggest thing that I had problems with was, of course, the fact that I kind of wanted to continue it. And that kind of came into my writing style. Now, a lot of writers kind of build their stuff out where there's many different ways to write a story. You can write the ending and then kind of build off from that and write how you got to that ending. You can write the beginning, middle, and end and then kind of fill in the gaps. But my favorite type of writing is the type of writing where I'm actually just like a viewer. I'm sitting there experiencing it as a viewer would. As I'm writing the story, I'm also picturing it in my head as if it was a TV show. I'm seeing the camera angles, I'm seeing the lighting, I'm seeing the character interaction, I'm seeing all that stuff as if it was watching a TV show. And it's because of that that I have created the writing style that I enjoy doing. And that is, as I'm writing a story, I'm experiencing it in real time. I am creating the scenarios and even creating the little tiny threads, the little tiny things that aren't complete, that are dropped off at different parts of the story, so that later down the road, I can suddenly have that aha moment and kind of take all the loose threads that I had and suddenly make sense of it all. I always consider it as my toolbox. When I write myself into a corner, when I suddenly am sitting there going, okay, I'm in a situation where I need to figure out how to get myself out of it. What tools have I left behind for myself in my toolbox? What character relationships have I created? What superpowers have I put into this story? What kind of concepts have I put into the story that I haven't yet explained that I can possibly use to tie everything together? And that's how I write. I always love experiencing that moment where I'm literally on part 7 of 8 of a story and I'm just like, oh, I don't know how it's going to end, but suddenly there's that click in my head, as almost as if I was watching the TV show and experiencing it like a viewer, where I go, wait a minute, is this what's going on? Is this what's about to happen? And that's what I tie into my story. I take all the pieces that I had developed beforehand and bring them together into one. Now, of course, comes down to the basic plot of the story. Now, what is the plot? The plot of the story is actually very simple because it's highly influenced by me, myself as a character, plus all the people around me. The characters in this story are my friends. They're people that I've interacted with in the real world. But, like I said, they kind of developed into characters of themselves based off the basic concept. Still influenced by the real world and the events that happen like that, but the overall plot is almost like, what would a group of friends kind of be like if superpowers were involved? If they discovered they had these unique abilities, how would the normal drama and situations that happen between friends be influenced by these superpowers? And that's where the whole concept of this story comes alive. We have developed far beyond that. The first part only had about 5 main characters, and now by the end of the series, I have reached a point where I have had about 54 different characters. And it just keeps going and going, growing as life progresses, as situations happen, and all that kind of stuff. And that's always why it's been really hard to kind of talk to people about this, is because the story is almost like the story of our lives, but in this kind of fantasy, weird world. At the end of all this, I reached a good point where I was like, okay, Steven, you've told your story, you're kind of done, just kind of wrap it up and leave it at that. And so I did. I wrapped it up at a part 8 of the series, and was like, okay, I'm done. But I wasn't done. So I decided to go back and I was like, you know what, part 5 didn't really explain too much on the tail end of it. It was really rushed and didn't really do too much. Maybe I should go back and split part 5 up into 2 parts, 5 and 6, and rewrite part 6, which is the second half of part 5, to have more detail. And it was actually because of that that I was able to introduce new characters, new concepts, new stories, and all that kind of stuff. And it was really cool to add that. So now all of a sudden, my series was at 9 parts, which felt a little off. It felt like not a round number, it wasn't really that great. But then I decided the character Steven went missing for one part. After part 6, he was gone and just disappeared, and we jumped into a whole nother story on part 7. What was he doing during that time? And so I decided to go back and add another part, explaining what he was doing during the time that part 8 was going on, and that became the new part 7. So finally, I sat there at a good rounded number of 10 parts to the story, and I decided, and it was concluded in a way that I could not continue it. And I was like, all right, it's done, story's complete, 10 parts, the end. But then I remembered that I am how I am. So I decided that I wanted to write more to the story. But then, of course, I was sitting there with my normal conflict where I was like, okay, here's my box of tools, all the situations that I set up in the previous parts. How can I continue the story from here? And I tried. There were so many attempts at writing volume 2 that I was just like, I need to start somewhere. And there were 5 attempts that I tried to start from that I hated. They were too convenient. They were too weird. And if there's one thing in writing that I try to avoid, is a Deus Ex Machina. For those that don't know what Deus Ex Machina is, it's basically that moment in a story where something happens just to be convenient and fix a problem. In a movie kind of concept, it's basically where the main hero is about to die. He's about to fall off a cliff, And suddenly that character that you thought died 2 scenes ago appears out of nowhere. Turns out he's not dead, and he grabs the hero and saves him and brings him back up so they can defeat the bad guy together. That's a Deus Ex Machina. Another example of that is, a superhero can't defeat the bad guy. He doesn't have the power to do it. But it turns out there was a power deep within that he did not know he had. Now suddenly he knows how to use it, and boom, able to beat the bad guy. Deus Ex Machina. I don't like writing like that. And it's because of that that Volume 2 went through 5 iterations of me going, nope, don't like that, nope, don't like that, nope, don't like that, before I finally was just like, you know what? Maybe I don't need a quick fix. Maybe I'll just start the story as if the ending of Volume 1 never happened. And that will be the mystery. That will be the underlying big story in the multi-part series that is Volume 2. And because of that, I created a new story that worked just like Volume 1. Parts divided into different stories, characters introduced, characters with new abilities, and the overall mystery behind it was why things were still amiss. Everyone knew it. Everyone knew things were off. And that's what I liked about the story. It was able to develop from that. And because of that, I ended up writing some of the best characters I have ever written in Volume 2. Volume 1, I will admit, was a little bit of a shutdown just because it was originally created as just a way to help me get to sleep at night. And so the characters weren't really fleshed out. They weren't really that great. People might sit here and think, well, isn't the character based off of you the best character? And I'm like, no. To be honest, Stephen's character is probably one of the worst characters. He's such an edgelord. He's so negative and emotional and all that kind of stuff. He wasn't really that interesting to write about. But it was based off of the way that I was feeling at the time. During that time, I was going through a little bit of depression and stuff like that, so I left the character as it was, because it was truthful. But in Volume 2, I was able to focus on other people. It wasn't just me writing about myself anymore. It was me writing about my concepts of all these other people that I knew. And the funniest thing about my writing is being observant of the real world. There were several situations in my story where I saw something and I anticipated something happening from that. So I wrote that into my story where I was like, this is going to happen. And then in real life, it ended up happening. It was kind of weird because I was just like, wow, I kind of predicted the future there. That was a little weird. But it was so interesting to the story. It's also because of my writing that I can create really cool out there scenarios. In Volume 2, there is a huge situation where there are 2 different characters, not to give too much away, 2 different characters that are completely separate from each other that I originally wrote as separate each other. They're 2 different people that later down the road, this situation happened where I was able to suddenly make those 2 people the same person. They were just 2 different sides of the same person. It was so interesting to me because it happened as I was writing it, where I all of a sudden went, aha, this makes sense. And that's what I loved about it. I've always enjoyed writing. And this, kind of like what I was talking about in my Warcraft stories, this is a perfect example of what I enjoy doing. Creating these scenarios, creating these concepts, and just building off of them. From nothing. It started as just helping me get to sleep, and now it's this. And that's what was so great about it. The final concept of my story, which is a big thing too, is of course the concept of death. There are a lot of characters in my story. Like I said, there's about 54 different characters. And the sad thing is, about 38 of them die at some point in the story. It's interesting for storytelling. Sydney, Roxy, really? Another big thing about my stories that is very interesting is, of course, the concept of death. There are about 54 different characters in my story, if not more. I haven't counted recently. But about 38 of those 54 die at some point. And it's the whole concept of no character is safe that I love about writing. I kind of mentioned this in my Warcraft books as well. But the fact that you can have all these main characters and almost sit there in fear that none of them are safe and they could die at any second is what drives the character motivation. Knowing that they have freaking superhero armor that, protects them from any plot convenience, oh, they can't die because they're the main character, kind of makes it annoying. And I like being able to remove that armor and just be like, no one's safe, anything can happen, be aware of it. And that's what drove a lot of my stories. And a lot of characters died for reasonable reason. Like, they're not going to just die for no reason. There's a reason behind every death in my story, especially in Volume 2. In Volume 1, a lot of people die, mostly because I was just writing it to kind of push the story along. But in Volume 2, few people die, but when they do die, it's for good reason. It's a good concept for storytelling. And all I can say is that this story has been going on for over 10 years. I've been working on it. And even right now, I'm trying to work on creating a Volume 3 for it. I finished Volume 2 at about 8 parts. And Volume 3 I've been trying to start up, and I've gone through 3 iterations that I never really liked, so I kind of scrapped them and made them non-canon. So I'm still trying to write, still trying to create, and who's to say that coming up here is not going to be a great idea that just pops out of nowhere? Influence comes from anywhere. It can come from real life, it can come from the media I watch, it can come from a freaking book I read, it can come from me walking down the street and just see someone do something that I'm like, that's a good thing that I can add to my story. That's a concept that I can work off of. And so it's because of that that I'm going to continue to write, and this hero storyline probably is not dead yet. I've been meaning to write all this stuff down for my hero storyline, mostly because I haven't yet. It's one of those things that kind of fears me, where if something were to happen to me, this entire story will be lost with me, because I haven't written it down. It's all up here. There are some people that I've told some of the concepts to and stuff like that, but they're not going to remember every detail. They're not going to know everything that's going on, and I have repeated it to myself many times so I don't forget it. I want to make sure that this story stays in my head until I write it down, because there's so much going on and so much concepts behind it. And even stuff that I have scrapped in the past ended up making it into the story. Out of the 5 variations that I had of Volume 2, some of the elements from those 5 variations ended up making it into the final story as just mediocre parts, but they were still there. So overall, this hero storyline is a big part of my life, and that's why it's always hard to talk about this with friends, is because the story is about us. It's about me. It's about the people I know. It's about their families. It's all this stuff tied together into one complete story. And so it's a little weird, almost thinking of it as like fan fiction, but of real life. It was something that started as just a way to help me get to sleep at night and eventually grew into something so big and meaningful. Characters grew into their own aspects beyond who they are in real life. And those characters end up becoming so influential with the continuation of the story that I still to this day want to continue it more. But that's basically the gist of the entire story. If you're at all interested in learning more about it, feel free to ask me. I'll gladly sit here and, tell you about the story and the details and all that kind of stuff, because I love it. It will take hours, because there's a lot of stuff to go through, because the story is pretty complicated. Think of like Doctor Who complication, where everything ties together in some way, shape, or form. But if you're also interested to see if your character is in the story, what your special ability is, whether or not you're still alive or not, feel free to ask too, because I'm always wanting to talk about this. I want as many people to know about the story as I can, so that it doesn't die. I want this story to be known to everyone. So, that's pretty much the gist of it. If you guys have any questions, be sure to let me know, and I'll see you guys next week. And remember, vlogging is dangerous. Broken iPods and broken iPads. I'll see you guys next time.